Representative Ken Calvert, the Honorable Heidi Shyu, General Charles Brown, Mr. Joe Lonsdale, and Moderator Morgan Brennan of CNBC.
Okay. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here for this panel. And thanks to the panelists for being here as well. Key topic today, we were talking about it backstage a little bit, this idea of the National Security Innovation Base. It's certainly been coming up throughout conversations and I think throughout panels in general today. And so I think just to start, and we'll go down the line, and I'll start with you, Congressman Calvert, how you would assess the state of the National Security Innovation Base?
Not good. You know, it's ironic. We come from a country of innovators. So we've innovated virtually every invention in mankind here in the United States, but we've lost our way. Today, to take an idea from the Department of Defense to actual deployment takes a ridiculous amount of time. And so here we are with the problems with the hypersonics and problems in other types of weapon systems, which is basically self-inflicted. So we have to basically just totally turn around this paradigm and get back on track, where we can get these systems and weapon systems on track as quickly as possible, or we're going to lose any future conflict.
And so Secretary Shyu, I want to get your thoughts on the same question, how you would assess the state of the National Security Innovation Base.
Well, I would say actually from my perspective, looking around in terms of the number of companies, I don't see a shortage of innovation. Where I see the problem is they get seed money to develop designs, prototypes, and they die on the vine because our acquisition system is too rigid, okay? So this is the piece that Secretary of Defense talked about, the valley of death that they fell into, right? So I'll be happy to chat a little bit later on about what are the initiative we're doing to try to pave over this bridge, okay?
Sounds good. And General Brown, I'll put the same question to you.
Sure. You know, when I think about the National Security Innovation Base, I look at it's not just what we do in the department, but it's also what we do with the academia, with our national labs, and what we do with the private sector. And I look at two metrics. One is the access to those, and then how we transition out of the innovation. I think the access is actually pretty decent and pretty good. So a lot of dialogue and discussion, but the transition is where we fail and fall really short. And Honorable Shyu just mentioned it. Representative Calvert just mentioned it. Secretary Austin mentioned it today. The Valley of Death. And so we have a lot of things that happen really good innovation-wise on one side of the valley. We just can't get it to the other side of the valley and scale it and be able to have a mix of what we do from a department, DOD standpoint, but also from a broader, you know, what becomes a commercial opportunity out in the private sector.
Yeah, and of course the Valley of Death I think is something we're going to get into and talk quite a bit more here about over the next 51 minutes. But Joe, I suspect you have some thoughts on this topic, on the innovation base, as well as the Valley of Death, given the fact that you're not only a co-founder of several companies several times over, but an investor as well.
Well, you know, I agree with what our leaders here have said so far. I might augment it by there's a couple big problems I see. First of all, there's not top technology cultures within the Department of Defense, and they're not very good at understanding what's a top technology culture or not. So if you ask a great football coach at a university that has a serious football program, they're going to know who's a good football player and who probably wouldn't even make the high school team. They don't have that same self-awareness at the DOD about their computer programmers and computer scientists, and that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem when they're evaluating technology companies they want to be working with as well. So there's a lot of transparency and a lot of work we need to do there. And then I think the other problem related to this which maybe contributes to this valley of death problem, is the way the whole structure is set up, the way the whole system is set up is very difficult. There's so many great Americans, men and women who are leaders in the DOD, but the whole system was designed in 1961 by McNamara, back when innovation was much more expensive. Innovation was around hardware. It was a top-down system in a time when, the main economics textbook at that time, Samuelson, was convinced the Soviet Union was going to pass us. The centralized things were the best way to run things in the world. We've learned since then that there's markets and there's open innovation. They're the best ways to run things. And yet we're not using a lot of the advantages of markets and open innovation and dynamism that we could be using in how procurement works. And so those are a couple of the problems that I think are holding us back.
Yeah, and General Brown, I want to get your thoughts on that as well. I mean, how you see this concept evolving. Like when you think about, for example, modernization of the Air Force. I mean, we were talking about this, you and I, a little bit earlier today too, but the role that software and some of these new and emerging technologies are increasingly going to play in the future and the evolution of warfighting, how you get those on board and how you're able to do it quickly.
Well, part of it's the talent. I mean, John, he just mentioned it in the aspect that I don't necessarily think we have to have that talent, all that talent in uniform, but enough talent in charge of the Department of the Air Force, that can actually understand it. And part of that, how we bring that talent is maybe, as I thought about, is bringing some of those that actually have his expertise to come work very closely with us to help be that translator, to help us work through the aspect of understanding what's out there and be able to understand how we bring it into the systems that we have today. In some cases, some of the systems we have today, because they're so old, it's not worth the effort. But there's other places where you actually go, we need to start anew, or how do we merge with the current technology and innovation and increase the capability of the whatever the platform might be.
So the Air Force has been pretty cutting edge in terms of being able to go out, interface with Silicon Valley, some of these tech companies, AFWorks, for example, to help put some of that seed funding out there, invest in R&D. Just to go back to this idea of the Valley of Death, General Brown, and that transition, what more can be done by the Air Force right now specifically to enable that transition and be able to see some of these companies and some of these R&D projects actually transition to production?
Make a decision. What I mean by that is we have a lot of activity on one side of the valley. We've got a lot of companies that we've got excited. We've got a lot of venture capital that has been pretty successful, but we've got to make a decision and pick several key programs and get them across the valley, and shepherd them across the valley. And when they get to the other side of the valley, we got to continue to nurture them to show some success. Because if we don't do that, then I really believe all that venture capital is just going to walk. We're going to find someplace else to go. And that's the thing we got to do. We got to be very focused on a couple of key capabilities, a couple of opportunities. And I think that's what's going to help us move forward.
Are we at a critical moment, Joe? I mean, as a venture capitalist, you hear this, I see you nodding your head. I mean, are we at that moment where if you don't find some sort of transition way to cut through the red tape, you're actually going to see that private sector funding dry up?
There's a lot of money that's gone to work in the venture capital ecosystem the last 3, 4, 5 years, in part inspired by a lot of these smaller programs that have helped get things going. There's lots of hacking for defense programs, lots of smaller awards, and yes, there's people are watching. Is this an area where people can actually make money? I think there's a Twitter thread by Catherine Boyle, who's one of the great leaders in venture capital at one of the big firms I was mentioning earlier, and I think she put it really well, which is a lot of us are watching us, a lot of people put a lot of money into work, and so far we haven't seen the big wins because it's so hard. So yeah, I think it is a critical moment to figure this out.
Secretary Shyu, how are you thinking about this? I mean, during your testimony, your confirmation process in the Senate, I mean, you talked about this, in fact, that you were looking to focus on some of these next generation technologies, really be able to support small businesses and startups. As you now come into this role, you're getting your arms around it. What do you see in terms of the companies that have been funded and how those investment dollars, I guess, from a DOD standpoint, are actually going to be able to transition?
I would just emphasize the point. I've seen a lot of really innovative small companies, okay? And one thing that I really am trying to focus on is a lot of these commercial companies, their product is commercial. But if we can work with them up front, early in the design stage, we can leverage their capability for commercial product into the DOD. I've engaged with a number of commercial companies up early in front. Tremendous potential to produce solutions They say, look, if you engage with us early, it doesn't cost much for us to add this design feature that you need. It will be a lot more expensive after you come back. Here's my separate requirement, right? And then it will be unique to you, and your volume's way too low. So the early engagement, they value that so much. So this is the piece that we're trying to thrust and push ahead. Engage with the commercial company upfront early in their design for the next generation of whatever product they're working on, okay? Great enthusiasm in that area. I want to tell you about that, okay? So I'm really excited about that. And I think the other piece I want to kind of share with you guys, SecDef actually talked about the Radar Fund. If you can give me a minute, I kind of explain what we're doing there, okay? So what we've done is take a look at the joint war fighting capability gaps, not just to a single service, but across the joint war fighting capability gaps. We work with all the COCOMs to understand the current state, what their shortfalls are, right? And looking in the future, what are the joint capability gaps. Then what we have done this summer, literally went to the services and asked them, do you have prototypes you would like to demonstrate in a joint experimentation? In 5 weeks, we received over 100 white papers. There's that much enthusiasm. We reviewed all these white papers, racked and stacked it in terms of which project has the best bang for the buck in terms of fulfilling these joint capability gaps that was defined by the joint services and COCOM, okay? And then what we did is we briefed to all the services, the COCOMs, vice chairman, okay, and DepSecDef. Thumbs up, pushing ahead in terms of our recommendation to fund these 32 projects. We're putting in the FY23 budget, and I mentioned to DepSecDef I could do 2 sprints per year. Therefore, you can map 2 scenarios that's vested, okay? I will say these scenarios are of significant interest. I won't say what it is. I think this is an unclassified facility, but you can imagine specific scenarios we're interested in, okay? So we've been mapping to that. I'm super thrilled. I'm going to be doing 2 sprints per year. The funding is baked into the FY23 request, okay? And the COCOMs are already asking me, how quickly can we get these capabilities in our hands? I said, you guys will be the ones evaluating the capabilities. If you like it, we can go into a rapid fielding, right? That is the path we have to be on. Rapid development in terms of prototypes, rapid experimentation, get it to the hands of the users and the operators, the warfighters. They're the one who ought to evaluate. I need this. I need this now. Get me 5,000, right? That's a path we have to be on. Let me tell you the bottleneck and the pitfalls. Let's say the COCOMs love that capability and they want it. Admiral Aquilino say, I demand this, I need it right now. How soon can you deliver this? Well, I have to go back to the service and say, did you pump for that? Right? There's no transition budget. Mm-hmm. Okay? The PPBE process that we have is so rigid, right? So this is the part of the thing we were trying to do to reform the PPBE, but this is the budgeting process. You guys probably all know that, right? So it's not a 2-year process. I need some flexibility. If the COCOM say, I really need this capability, I'll take the solution now, rather than refine the requirement and give me exquisite solution a decade from now, right? So give me this capability now. Give me the authority and a mechanism so I can enable that. So I asked for some bridge funding, right? The ability to do that. So this is something that I got to work internally within the DOD, and got to work with the Hill, because they want to, count every penny that we have, right?
All right, so speaking of working with the Hill, I know somebody knows a little something about budget that's on this panel as the ranking member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. What do you think about what Secretary Shyu just said? And also, just as importantly, what can Congress do to to enable this process, to enable more innovation, to enable more work in a more timely and more, I guess, capitalistic manner with private sector?
Well, first I want to say the U.S. government's been a lousy partner, quite frankly. We don't protect intellectual property. We get companies in, we waste their time. Then we're wondering why we're not getting the technologies we want. One of the things I'd like to do is create an innovation fund in the appropriations process to start out, say, with about $100 million, and then we can pick a number of people that we want to succeed and get them through that valley of death where they can actually get to procurement. Ideas like that were, and also how we can clean up some of the regulatory processes that are out there today where we can move things more rapidly. Over the years, we've decided not to take risk anymore, and we want to perfect this process. There is no such thing as perfection. We want to get there, but we want to make sure that we get the systems out in a timely fashion and an affordable fashion.
Why do you think there's no risk? And I ask that because I know you've been at this for 3 decades now. You've seen a lot of stuff. You could point to the F-117 that's sitting outside here. It's been pointed out to me by multiple people over the last 2 days as an example of productivity, moving quickly, innovation, but doing so on a realistic timeline. How did we get away from that? That was, what, 40 years ago? How did we get away from that?
That's interesting you point that out. That was designed by Kelly Johnson, who created the P-38 in World War II. I think I mentioned that earlier today to some folks. He went to a bar here, and I heard Nel Segundo, and over a cocktail napkin, laid down the P-38. 9 months later, it came down the production line. We lost a lot of pilots. It was a tough plane, but it won the war. It knocked out the zero population at the beginning of World War II. We've lost our way. We need to get program managers to take responsibility and stay with these new technologies until they succeed. Nobody wants to take responsibility, and they're afraid of taking risk because they think that's going to ruin their career. We need to make sure that risk is acceptable. I think that the private sector folks here will tell you that they expect people to fail. They don't want them to fail every day, but they want to get them to success. But that's how you get there.
So, Joe, I have to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think courage is a really key thing here. I think you guys both mentioned that, and I really appreciate that because it does seem like there is a lack of courage in certain parts of the DOD, which is ironic because our greatest, most courageous warriors are within the DOD as well in this society, and you definitely still have that courage from so many great men and women, and so many people I know who truly are the most courageous people work in the DOD, and yet, ironically, there is a lack of courage, from my perspective, in how they engage with and pick winners. We were also, you're speaking backstage about the whole big drone program. There's a problem where there's no clear standard for what small drones we're going to use and work with in America. And I think they had a big competition, right? The blue drone program, and there were a bunch of companies that entered, but there were 5 that were better than the rest. And rather than pick one, they just picked all of them, which means there's no standard, which meant that most of them are bankrupt today because they couldn't make enough money. So we need courage to actually choose and actually make decisions and actually try things. And that's what it means to be more like the U.S. and less like the Soviet Union, is that not everything is going to work, but more things are going to work better.
General Brown, I want to get your thoughts on this, especially since I do know you very actively interface with Silicon Valley, with the tech community. What are the technologies you're most excited about? Are there certain companies that you're excited about? And how do you work with them to continue to enhance these relationships and capabilities?
I'm not going to name any companies.
I tried.
But I will tell you that areas that we're interested in, we have a lot of data. And so it's how do we move our data to make decisions? When you think about advanced battle management system, it's really about moving information. So there's aspects of that. We're doing things with AFWorks and AF Ventures on eVTOL. And so, how do you look at the electrical vertical takeoff and landing capability? And it's interesting because folks are looking at it, how do you use it in an air taxi? Well, I'm not necessarily interested in an air taxi. I'm looking at something that can move people and cargo. And so there's maybe a natural fit there in some cases. And then the other thing is I don't know what I don't know. And so part of this is I've got operational problems that I need to be able to go to to the tech sector or to industry and go, okay, here's what I'm thinking about, and they probably have something that they're working on that may be suitable that we can bring together. Maybe not today, but it may be something we can work with very closely on. And at the same time, I really think it's important that we have something that we can iterate with, which goes to the innovation fund that Rep. Calvert kind of talked about. So you can innovate this and move at a quicker pace and have our operators very closely with those that are doing the technical piece. So it's not, you know, they build it and then throw it over the fence. Then we go, it doesn't work, we throw it back over the fence. We're working it together day in and day out. And it's a cultural shift. And I think, I mean, we as a nation have done this before. We can do it. It's just we got to put our mind to it, and we got to get serious about it, particularly in the environment we're in today.
Yeah. Secretary Shyu, Secretary Austin earlier today, one of the messages he delivered was calling for deeper ties between the Pentagon and tech companies to counter China. He also noted that more than 2,500 small businesses have been awarded funds. How many of those businesses are still active? How are you gauging, or how are you looking to gauge success?
Yeah, this is a great question. That's exactly the question I had when I first walked into the Pentagon 4 months ago. Okay, just who are the companies? So one of the things that we are doing is literally taking a database that we have that can actually extract the data from all the SBIRs, Small Business Innovation Funds, right? All the phase 1 contracts, the phase 2 contracts, and then the program manager, the program has to pick it up. They're all in diverse databases, have no visibility into it, right? And all the innovation organizations, we have over 20 different innovation organizations within the DOD, right? We have DIU, we have
that sounds like it's slowing things down. Am I crazy to think that? That sounds like it's slowing things down, to have so many different programs, so many different areas where this could be happening.
So I would say having a single innovation organization, I don't think will work. You're overwhelmed with bureaucracy, okay? It's much better off to have Air Force have their own, Marine have their own, because they're not necessarily the same, okay? So I'm not trying to stamp out innovation. What I'm trying to do is make sure that if the Marines have an innovative idea and got a product, does the Army need it? Or are they all searching for the same things? Perhaps there's a database they can actually share and search, right? So that's step one. When we talk to over 20 of these innovation organizations across the DOD, they all said that they would love to have that, right? So we're moving forward. I actually search a number of companies that has the ability to do this software to extract data everywhere. So you have the analytics capability as well. So we're going to pull that together. I want to pull that together rapidly and share that. And what are the best practices, right? And then the next piece I want to understand is, what are the problems that these small companies have? I wanted to engage with venture capitalists, and I actually spoke to Joe a little bit earlier. I want to have the ability to get their take on what are the shortfalls, right? Why is it so hard to do business with the DOD? And I'm engaging with small companies to understand what are the impediments that they have. And then I can start tackling each and every one of these pieces, the most common critical problems that they have. For example, it's really extremely hard when I went to visit one small business in Santa Monica. Superb product, okay? They say, we're running out of money. I say, hello, you're just telling me today you think I have a bank account I can open up and give it to you tomorrow, right? So that's the problem. We need to have a lot more feedback and interaction, right? They actually have some Air Force funding. They have venture capitalists that's interested in putting funding in them if they have production contracts. So here's the value of death. They have a design. The prototype won't be ready for another year and a half, right? So I'm going to go back, and I wrote that down. I'm trying to figure out how I can find them some money, right, to bridge them over so they can build a prototype. So these are the problems that these small companies have, right?
So you've all kind of mentioned this, but it's this being able to move more quickly, move with a sense of urgency. I want to bring up a slide from the Reagan Defense Survey, and it is the greatest concerns about China's technological progress. And now I realize China's been a pretty big topic here today as well. And it's not just military buildup, but it's also things like technology. And that's case in point here on this slide, where artificial intelligence is actually 23%. It actually matches supply chain vulnerability, which I think is what everybody everywhere has been talking about in the midst of COVID and transportation bottlenecks and inventory shortages, et cetera. But to see artificial intelligence taking on a majority here on this chart, I guess, Congressman, how do we move with more of a sense of urgency? And when it comes to something like artificial intelligence, which everyone is talking about and which is so critical to the future, including in national security, do there need to be rules of the road?
Well, it's interesting technology, but we're going to have to go in that direction because these weapon systems are becoming more and more complex. And so we just can't go through the data fast enough in order to make determinations on how to utilize that technology. I want to go back to it. We need to create more efficiencies. I'm going to disagree a little bit. I've been a critic of the growth of the civilian population in the Pentagon for some time. And I think we need to reevaluate that to skinny down the number of people, the civilians relative to the military. It's the highest number in the history of the Pentagon. And that does not create efficiencies in my mind. And so that we have to do. We've got to make sure that these types of new technologies, whether it's new computer technologies that we can't get into or AI, we need the private sector, quite frankly, knows a hell of a lot more about this than we do. We need to depend on them.
Joe?
On China? Well, listen, we're still ahead of AI in China. It's something people misunderstand. Like the most important new papers, the most important new breakthroughs, the majority of the top stuff's happening in the US. We still have an edge there. China has things they're allowed to do with data that we're not allowed to do with data, that's allowing them to learn certain types of things, whether it's in biology or whether it's in watching all of the people and learning, in mass control. There's things they can do we can't, but we're still pretty far ahead. I will say that maybe because of the talent issue we're talking about earlier, when we do our top AI things, we don't usually, the first thought's not let's go work with the military, because I'll give you an example right now I'm not supposed to probably talk about, but we're part of putting maybe about $100 million along with a few friends into a new company, which is some of the very top talent in our opinion in AI in the country. There's this group called OpenAI that Elon Musk and a lot of our people were involved in that's done some great things, and there's a group that actually beat them and did something even better than their GPT-3 at one of the two big tech companies, and a lot of that group is very frustrated at that company because they're not able to publish it because it's very controversial right now, so they're leaving, and we're going to be backing them to do a business. And I'll be honest, we had a bunch of strategy discussions the last 3 weeks. Like, we didn't even think about defense as a thing because it's just like we don't think they're going to be recognized by the defense world for being the best, just because that ability is not there right now in our national security apparatus. And maybe eventually we'll bring it to defense after doing lots of other things with it, because at that point maybe they'll recognize it.
General Brown, how are you thinking about artificial intelligence?
I do believe, and to Joe's point, of how our adversaries may use artificial intelligence different from how we might. And so there's really no international norms of behavior and how they may be used. And so although we may be ahead, we may be handcuffed based on our own ethics and our own values.
Yep.
And we got to think about that, which is why we have to look at advantages in other ways as a nation and not just focus on AI versus AI. And so that's at least my thought process. I always believe that even when we have AI, you're still going to have someone, a person in the loop. AI is going to provide us options faster, so you don't have to actually sit around a table and talk about it, but it provides you options much faster. And I think the other thing as we work with AI is our ability to trust the AI. And I think that's going to be a cultural piece we'll have to work through as well.
Well, it also speaks to, and Joe, you kind of touched on this, and Secretary Shyu, I'm going to go to you first and then probably go right on back down the panel because I think everybody has thoughts on this. But it touches on talent and what the future pipeline of talent is going to entail and what those skill sets are going to be.
So can I finish the AI piece as well?
Yeah, no, yes, absolutely.
Okay. So trusted AI tied together with trusted autonomy is a big push from my office. I've engaged with a number of companies on this topic, and I'm pretty excited because a number of people is jumping on that bandwagon to focus on the technology. I even looked at a company that builds processors that will enable that. So that is a path we're definitely going, okay? Because in my mind, in the next highly contested conflict, we want to be able to penetrate with UASs, okay? And you want to be able to autonomously fly and have ability to share information with your wingman autonomously, okay? So anyway, we're absolutely focused on that, and we're moving forward on that, okay? So, okay, back to the talent base, okay? The talent base is extraordinarily important. DOD this year funded 416 Smart Scholars. This is a scholarship program for undergraduate, master's, and PhD programs in the STEM fields, okay? And I was really thrilled to actually last night meet one of the Smart Scholars that was here, okay? That was going to George Washington University, so that's great. And she told me when she graduates, she's going to the Army to help them to do an analytics organization. So this is exactly what we want. We want to groom the STEM pipeline. We want to bring them into the DOD, into our laboratories, and become part of our knowledge base, right? The new knowledge base. The other thing we've done this year, which I think is pretty exciting, because I think it's important to build the knowledge base before you head into universities. You want to grow your pipeline, right? You got to grow a lot earlier. So we created more than 10 different STEM camps for junior high school kids, okay? Over 1,000 junior high school students went to this 1 week-long STEM camp. That's to interest them to getting into the science and engineering fields in the future, right? And what we're doing now is reaching even lower into 5th grade to create these STEM education programs to get them interested going into engineering, because that's the shortfall that we have. We don't have enough of a pipeline within the US to even draw from. So I'm pretty excited about all of this. And the other thing that I've asked DepSec that I would love to do is increase the exchange of engineers with the commercial industry, because I think that's absolutely important for each of the services to do that, right? Let's go to the commercial industry, let's spend a year there and bring one of the commercial industry folks into the DOD. They can bring the best practices from the commercial industry into the DOD to start to change the culture, right? So I actually spoke to Microsoft this morning, and they were enthusiastic about it. So I want to start that to increase the sharing of information and the best practices to start to change the culture. Right?
Joe, I want to get your reaction to that. And also, I know you're very focused on talent too, and over the last couple of years we've seen it, and it seems like maybe it's subsided somewhat, but there had been debates and controversies and certain flare-ups at certain companies with certain employees who maybe didn't want to be doing national security or defense work. Are we past that point? Can we attract the talent necessary? Well,
I think a lot of what the undersecretary talked about makes a lot of sense in terms of pushing STEM talent and getting them engaged. We're definitely not past that point in Silicon Valley. A lot of companies in Silicon Valley, a lot of the big tech companies don't want to be working with the DoD, and that is a big problem here. In China, they don't have a choice, right? Which is, I'm not sure that's a good thing either, by the way. But it's a big problem here that we haven't engaged them. You know, I think the other issue here, which I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, is really understanding what a technology culture is and really being able to measure technology cultures. One of the unique things about top technology cultures, you know, when Apple wanted to do something new, they actually had a rule that it was a separate group and only one person, maybe Steve Jobs, maybe someone else, could talk to that group, and the engineers were helping to run that group and set the vision, and you didn't want a lot of senior people, senior bureaucrats reaching in and having opinions and getting in the way. And the way we ran things even early on at Palantir and in other companies I've built, that have succeeded in the technology world, is the engineers helped run the company. They helped set this strategy. They helped iterate. They knew what was possible. And within like a very big command and control system, that's very hard. The way the DoD is set up is the engineer's in the basement, and he's being told, or she's being told what to do, as opposed to they're along next to the leaders, iterating. They're understood. Their leadership's part of it. And so I think naturally the way the DoD is set up right now, the system, it's very hard to fix it, and you're going to have to try new things and really disrupt the way it works if you're going to attract the top talent and make them feel empowered and make them feel like they're actually helping run the things they're doing.
General Brown, I want to get your thoughts on this. And also just this idea of how some of these best practices may be in private sector, whether they could be incorporated from, I guess, a workplace and a talent and cultural standpoint, whether there's aspects of that could actually, in fact, be incorporated into the Air Force structure.
I think there is, but I kind of build on what Joe said. If we just bring, kind of like the Honorable Shyu said, you bring in this talent, but you put it into these regular, bowels of the Air Force, and not actually set it aside and actually allow it to, show us how this innovative culture can work, that's where it's going to fail. So we really got to think about it. If we bring, from outside, how we bring it in and set up an organization so they can really thrive. The other part I do think about, even as we think about, whether it's various STEM scholars that we bring into the Air Force and bring in uniform, is how we develop them throughout their career. So they may not have a traditional career path, and we still got to get them promoted and make it exciting for them to want to stay with us, because otherwise they'll go work for Joe. Which may be good or bad, because now we have someone who actually knows the DOD. But it's really how we need to think a little bit harder how we do talent management. And the thing I'm thinking about as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force is what specialties do I not have in the Air Force today that I'll need 15 years from now? And what specialties do I have today that I won't need 15 years from now? And how do we make that transition? And how do I make it so they want to stay with the United States Air Force, whether it's in uniform or as a civilian, or a relationship, which is even more important, is having good relationships so you have companies that want to work with DOD versus the other way around where they go, it's too hard to do.
Yeah, and we want that, right? We need those cultures to be there. I'll give you, I don't want to tell you too many horror stories, but a common thing that would happen is there'd be a technology problem that our company knows we can solve, and there's a big contract, and we're subbing through someone that's actually in touch, one of the big giant legacy contractors, and we're solving the problem, but we're getting, okay, you guys can come do this for us, we're going to give you 3% of it. And we're like, we get 3% of the pay, you get 97%, but we're the one who's solving it. And there's no one to appeal to, because there's no one who understands the technology well enough within the top ranks to know, oh, these guys are getting taken advantage of, and it's a mess, and actually we don't need to be paying $120 million for this. It's actually abrogated now by the new way of doing it, but the old big company still gets paid that because that's, because they take it. So we need those cultures there in order to get the best solutions and the most efficient solutions to win.
So we have a bunch of questions from the audience. I'm going to try and get to all of them here. Our first question is, the Biden administration has prioritized R&D much more than procurement, dangerously so. Is R&D or procurement the proper focus, NSIB-related developments? Who would like to take that question?
I might, because for 20 years we were at war in the Middle East, obviously, and we neglected our R&D budgets. We cut them down considerably. We borrowed from those accounts and used them for other things. These budgets, the budgets we're talking about now, have increased R&D because we have a lot of catch-up to do. We created the technology for the hypersonic missile, and the technology was stolen by China. They perfected it, and they now are deploying it in the hundreds. And so now we're having to play catch-up because of that situation and other problems in the technology field. And so we had to increase our R&D budgets in order to make sure we are in a position to procure these new systems as soon as possible.
You have some thoughts on this, right? Yeah,
a few thoughts. Okay. First of all, I completely concur with your comment. That's exactly what happened. What we don't have within this country is a consistent roadmap that doesn't change. We need a long-term strategy instead of a strategy that pivots every 4 years, right? And I think part of the problem, DARPA actually spawned off the hypersonics technology, right? They have a lot of great innovative ideas, but the problem is bridging it over to a service who wants to accept that, right? And create it, turn it into a program of record, okay? I will tell you one other thing that we're doing now, okay? Hypersonic is, yes, we're behind. But my job, given by SecDef, was looking for the asymmetric ways to counter hypersonics. And I'm briefing him next week, okay? So I've created a whole list of asymmetric ways, much cheaper.
You can't share any of that
I can't share it with you, sorry. It's multi-caveat.
Okay, it's a cliffhanger, we'll wait for it.
Okay. few people I may be able to brief. I'll come brief you.
Okay.
Deal.
Forward to it.
You'll love it.
Okay.
So we have another question. I think this one's for you, Congressman. Appropriations committees are known for resisting budget flexibility for innovation efforts. Can that change?
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier in creating this innovation fund where we have flexibility within the appropriations process, where we can work with the DOD and the agencies there to make sure that we fund technologies that we want to fund to get them through this valley of death and to get it to the procurement process. It's frustrating as hell. We run into this every day, and so I'm working to do that. I'm going to work with my friends on both sides of the aisle in the Senate to do that, and I'm hoping that we can do that as soon as possible.
So, can I chime in? Yes. Okay. So one of the things that we want to do via the radar concept, literally, is to be able to take prototypes, and we're involving industry early to share with them, here's the capability gaps we have, okay, and help us trying to figure out a solution to that. And then bring a prototype, we're going to test it out, and I want to rapidly transition it. So that's exactly the path we have to be on, okay, in order to get ahead of the Chinese. There's no other way. Okay?
I actually want to get your thoughts on this, Joe, before I move on to the next question. I mean, we're talking a lot about how, on this panel today, how and where perhaps some of the DOD culture needs to change. Does the culture of Congress need to change too to enable this?
Yeah, I think there's some amazing leaders in Congress. I've always wondered why Congress doesn't have a little bit more staff and ability to understand what's going on in some of these places and engaging in the right way, and why they don't reach out more to the innovation world when they're making these plans with those staff. And I guess they're really busy. There's only so much staff, so I guess have a lot to do there. But there probably could be some things they could learn from that side too, and how they engage with it.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next question. With clear need to help innovative companies cross the valley of death, what changes need to be made to DOD budget process? Is it time to move away from the PPBE process? Do I have any takers on this?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
not surprised. Have at it.
Yes.
It's way, way too risk averse, right? Here, okay, I gave Representative Thornberry an example back when I was in the Army the first time, when I was in the Pentagon. And his question to me is, why does acquisition take so long? I gave him an example. Okay, there's something that's called an acquisition bus. Okay, the program manager is the driver of this bus. And every single stakeholder you have is on this bus. And every single one of them has a steering wheel and a brake. Okay, that is the process we're in. Because anybody can say no, right? And when a program gets
Sounds like the Senate.
longer bus, okay? So when a program fails, in industry, I tell you what we do, right? I came from industry. We put all the best people we have across the company to turn the bus upside down because it's in the ditch, right? We got right side up because you're bleeding cash, okay? We throw all the best people on, stop the bleeding, right size it, fix the problem, move on. In the Pentagon, what happens? They'll come look at it, they'll shoot out the tires, the windows, and the kneecap of the program manager because they can then take their money to do something else, right? And then there will be investigation, why did you fail, right? So there's 10,000 meetings that was placed on top of you. You got to answer what happened. The press wants to know, the Hill wants to know, all your 10 chains of command wants to know. That's what happens. And you've got to stretch out programs because the Hill's going to cut your budget. You're obviously not on track, right? So it's this death spiral we created for ourselves. We've got to change that. If you want us to be more risk-averse and move fast, don't kill us the first time we trip, right? So don't tie our 2 feet together and expect us to run a marathon as quickly as possible. It can't happen.
Sounds like the definition of accountability needs to change in a sense.
Yes.
Wow. So the next question actually I think dovetails really nicely into this, and that is, how do we measure innovation and how do we know if we're successful? And I suspect everybody on this panel could probably answer this question.
It works.
General Brown, I'll start with you.
Well, that it transitions to a capability that we can actually produce. We have a lot of innovation. I mean, there's not a lack of innovation. It's a lack of innovation that actually is in the hands of the warfighter. And that, to me, is where the issue is, and it goes back to what Honorable Shyu just said. You know, the bus is all over the place. It's usually in the ditch. It's in the valley. And we can't get it out of the valley. And then what happens, some stop before they even get to the valley. And that's where Joe has kind of highlighted they don't want to work with DOD. So we really got to think differently about, you know, finding some of these and moving them across the valley. And Honorable Shyu also talked about, you know, DARPA, and we do this a lot. We'll come up with a lot of good ideas. We'll do the innovation. And then we want to get it across the valley. It's a lot of tag, not it. Nobody wants it. Well, you asked for it. Mm-hmm. You asked for all this innovation, but then when you're ready to go bring it over and start paying for it, then we got to follow through. And that's the part I think we got to do. So don't ask for stuff you don't want. Okay? Or here's the problem we're trying to solve, that we got to come in behind that and make sure we're going to pay for it and make it a program of record and scale it. And I haven't talked to some of the small companies, and Joe can probably do this. If we say we really want this, they'll figure out how to scale. Mm-hmm. Easily.
I would just say we need people to take responsibility. I looked at Admiral Rickover back in the day. You know, we have the best submarine fleet in the world, bar none, primarily because he was a dictator. I mean, he took on the responsibility. He took on everything. A lot to say, like with Kelly Johnson at Skunk Works. He would basically tell the CEO of his company to jump in the lake. And so, but you need strong-willed individuals like that to take over the process. And we don't have that.
There may be a way to just pick a couple of different projects where we know, and this goes with the Raider, once we decide, we pick someone, put them in charge, and we carry this thing all the way to the end, versus right now it's just kind of all over the map and no one's really responsible, and you have too many people to have a vote.
How many program managers do we have over the history on the F-35?
I don't know, but it's probably a lot.
Joe, I want to get your thoughts on
that. Yeah, I love what you guys are saying. One of my favorite books on this is Winston Churchill wrote about before the First World War. He was in Lord Admiralty of the Navy, and he had to go in and basically just like fix everything. It was a total screw up, and you needed a strong personality to come in and go through red tape and just push things through. You know, innovation means it's in the hands of the warfighter. I think innovation also means it's done efficiently at the end of the day, which what that means is that certain things are going to fail, but how much money are you spending for what output? And how honest are you about that? I'm not an expert on the Air Force, but I think you spend about $49 billion a year on maintenance. And I think if you would use AI and technology ahead of time now to plan out those things, you're probably be spending a lot less on maintenance, a lot more efficiently, and getting a lot better stuff in the hands of the warfighters. There's a lot of ways technology and innovation can apply to a lot of those types of problems on our spend as well, most likely.
We're actually going down that path. It's taken us a while to get there, as you might imagine.
Awesome.
We have, it looks like 4 more questions in a little over 4 minutes. I think we can do it. Okay, next question. Can an in-QTEL VC funding mechanism that is used within the intelligence community have a place and be successful at a DOD level to improve innovation?
So we're actually looking at that right now. Literally, this was a topic that popped up about a month ago inside R&E to think about, can we leverage something like an in-QTEL? So one of the things I want to do is engage with the venture capitalists. Matter of fact, I'm heading to a dinner tonight, literally to engage with the venture capitalists and get their take about how to better work with the DOD. What are the things we need to do differently? So I want to explore all the details before I go to DepSecDef and SecDev with a proposal. Okay, so right on.
How do you fix the innovation culture that you have all diagnosed? Is it an issue with the services or with the department leadership or both?
Both.
Culture within the department has to change immediately. Winston Churchill also had I think it was attributed to Winston Churchill before World War II. The worst 2 words in the English language is too late. And we're in a situation, I think, today that we don't want to be in. So we need to move as quickly as possible, and we need to get people that are going to work to make sure that happens.
General, did you You look like you had something.
Well, part of it is we got to promote them. They got to see a future. And that's all part of the talent management aspect. They see a future, particularly in a hierarchical organization like the Air Force or the military. They got to see a future that they can move to a senior level, or we continue to pay them more for the value of what they do as another opportunity to show how important they are.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. We got 2.5 minutes. We can do this. Would Congressman Calvert like to expand on too many civilians in the Pentagon? His opinion contradicts Han Shyu effort to get top civilian talent in the Pentagon and the effort to get uniforms out of the Pentagon and back into operational roles.
Look, there's a lot of talented people that are civilians in the Pentagon. That's not the point. The point is that there's too many people. So over time, we can bring down the numbers, and the Defense Board actually said that's what we should do. If we brought it back to the historic norm, we would save approximately $125 billion over 5 years. And in my world, that's real money. And I suspect that the efficiencies within the Pentagon would pick up. The Marines, by the way, are doing a good job of doing that, and I'm hoping that the rest of the services look to them and the rest of the DOD enterprise, and that's throughout the country, by the way. And I'm not talking about depots and and all that. I'm talking, I don't get Tom Cole after me, but I'm about just the middle bureaucracy especially.
All right, our final question here. The Civil Space Program at NASA has been successful utilizing services contracts and OTA to develop new capabilities. Is there an opportunity for DOD to learn from some of those successes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we absolutely have to think that way, because the commercial world could very well provide a capability earlier than we can, and you can just buy it as a service.
SpaceX has dropped our launch cost in half. Just that one. We had a monopoly, and there's no, well, now we're going back to a monopoly, I'm afraid. But anyway.
There's a lot of us in the innovation world who are eager to serve and eager to work with the DOD. And if there are big things that need to be done on the outside, you can come to the people who run the big funds and the big companies, and a lot of them are really eager to help. And so that kind of engagement would, I think, be met with a lot of positive energy from the technology sector.
I think that is where we're going to end this conversation, on those words. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the questions. What a pleasure and what an honor and a privilege to be joined by the 4 of you today. Representative Ken Calvert, the Honorable Heidi Shyu, General C.Q. Brown, and Joe Lonsdale. Thanks for being up here today. Appreciate it.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.